Hey, what's up, everyone? Velez here. Thank you for joining me in the Velez Zone, where we talk everything health, wealth, and happiness. So, I'm going to preface this whole series and say right off the bat that this talk isn't for everyone. Philosophy and spirituality are often associated with religion and preaching, which is the last thing I'm trying to do here. But I do want to present you with some tangible, albeit existential topics that could help you approach life differently. The ideas I'm presenting are not meant to be interpreted absolutely, and in fact, you should question what I'm saying. But just think of it as an option you can use to change your perspective. This approach has seemed to work in my life so far, so to the extent it could help one of you become more self-aware, please use it. And so if you're at that point in life where you're beginning to question the meaning of your existence and are turning more inward towards yourself and consciousness, then this might be for you. But if not, then I hope at least these ideas can start turning those gears in your head. And the reason I want to share this with you all is because through my life experience, the gift of self-awareness has been such a turning point in my life that I almost feel a responsibility to share with others. And as I navigate life, I've been putting together these ideas that form my foundation of my perspective. In a way, my personal life philosophy is that we all must be awakened to our consciousness if we ever want to achieve our potential. And the way we ultimately self-actualize is to balance health, wealth, and happiness. In fact, we really live two lives simultaneously: a participatory life where we share the external world with others, and a solitary life experienced solely in our mind, where we are trapped with our thoughts and feelings. And so as we navigate the world, it's important to keep things in perspective and always try and understand why things are happening instead of only focusing on what is happening. And just so we can all be on the same page, I want to preface and say this whole series of episodes is about my personal subjective thoughts based on my unique reality. And I say thoughts instead of beliefs because I think of them as strong convictions loosely held. I feel like belief implies an unwavering perspective. But I share this with you all because this is really how I approach life. And so I'm coming to you with this set of thoughts because I found them to be a useful framework to tackle some really big existential problems that all humans deal with. And I just want to point out that I may bring up some uncomfortable topics, but I'm sharing these thoughts with you all as an observer without judgment. This is my personal point of view, and I'm trying to share my private thoughts to you while being sensitive. So if anything I say hits a nerve, ask yourself not only what you're feeling, but why. Have an open mind to ideologies that may clash directly with yours. It's not that one philosophy is better than the other, it's all based on the practitioner. And just in general, if you ever viscerally disagree with someone about something, realize that it's possible to separate the person from the idea. Not all ideas are reflections of our character. Sometimes they are, but without enough personal context, it's impossible to make an accurate judgment about someone based off something they say or do. So if you find yourself negatively reacting to something, just pause, stop, and reflect on what's going on. Sometimes we may use different words to mean different things, and that can also lead to a breakdown in communication. I guess this is a long-winded way of me saying that my intention here is not to pass judgment or to be malicious. I'm trying to understand how the world works and share it with you. So basically, you can consider this a safe conversation. And with that, let's get into it. A lot of life is focused on our participatory life because it's easy to measure ourselves against the external world. But I believe understanding our solitary world can lead to a more fulfilling existence. Until we realize we have an internal compass of wants and needs that exist completely outside of the world's expectations of ourselves, then we cannot truly self-actualize. External validation without internal satisfaction is the equivalent of living a life you think you should be living rather than the one you want to live. And it's very easy to get sucked into this trap too, especially if you come from a lower or middle class household that thinks very linearly about obstacles such as health, wealth, and happiness. The standard advice many of us receive is get an education, get a nice career at a company with good benefits, pay your dues, and 40 years later, you might be able to retire and finally enjoy life. No thanks. That's not for me, and I'm sure it's not for a lot of you listening. But we've unfortunately become indoctrinated by this dogma where we subconsciously grow up thinking this is the only path to follow. But we are completely missing the point that wealth without your health and happiness is not a life worth living. The problem is that many of us don't even have enough life experience to know what we want out of life. And that's okay, it's a moving target for everyone. In my experience, questioning myself and following my authentic truth has been a rewarding path. Deciding to leave my banking job to open up a health facility was a turning point for me. Not only have I never been happier, but it has also improved my emotional health and has put me on a reasonable path to build wealth. As long as I am living life on my own terms, I know I'm getting closer to fulfilling my potential. And so as a starting point, I'd like you to quickly take stock of your life and pause the episode if you need to. Are you happy with your personal relationships? What about your career? Do you have time for yourself during the week? What is an ideal day for yourself? Often we never ask ourselves these questions because they seem like dreams, but they're only dreams if they're unrealistic. And if you can find one person in the world who's doing what you like, odds are it's possible. We as individuals are the only one who can limit our own imagination of what's possible. My fiancée Jasmine and I made up this term called the awakening in 2017. At the time, we had just moved in with each other and I started working at the investment bank. This is my first time living on my own, let alone with a romantic partner, and at a new job that was very demanding of my energy. What seemed like a dream job to my friends on the outside soon became a living hell. And it wasn't the hours of work, it was a lack of control of my life. The only free time I had was doing chores on Saturday when I didn't work. I went through my days as a walking ball of anxiety, always reacting to my work email. And within the first 6 months, I knew this type of existence wasn't for me. And I felt terrible because everyone gave me the impression I had a successful job, but on the inside, I felt myself decaying. And this isn't to say I didn't appreciate my time working at the bank. It was one of the best experiences of my life. In fact, I find that I'm very good at finding the silver lining in painful experiences. But at the time, I couldn't pinpoint what I was feeling. I stopped doing my hair, I worked out less, I didn't even want to hang out with my friends. I felt like I was merely existing. Life was happening to me and someone else had the wheel. And when I tried talking to Jasmine about it, I just didn't have the words. Spiritually, I knew there was something wrong, but intellectually, I couldn't communicate it. You see, I live a pretty stoic and agnostic life. I rely on truth, logic, and reason to guide me on the right path. And so naturally, I treated my anguish as a logical problem I needed to solve. So I Googled it. I typed, "I hate my job." Pretty straightforward. And lo and behold, a new world opened up to me, where I realized that other people also had this same problem. I wasn't alone, and in fact, other people had even solved it. It was so simple. Do what you love. What a complex problem wrapped into 4 small words. Easy to say when you've done it, but seemingly impossible when it comes to starting. And so I began on my quest to figure out not only theoretically, what do I love, but practically, how can I do what I love and survive? And just from a practical sense, doing what you love intuitively feels right. There are a lot of people who are world-class at something. You could be a world-class doctor, dancer, investor, or even athlete. But these are such competitive fields that everyone is trying to be the best. However, success can be achieved through a mix of natural talent and hard work. You could also think of this as potential and work ethic. Potential is truthfully out of our control. Some people are born natural musicians or athletes, while others grow up being good at math and computers. It doesn't matter how hard you work, if you don't have an ear for music, you're never going to become a world-class pianist. And although that doesn't mean you shouldn't try, it isn't exactly a green light to go all in on music either. But if we have the requisite self-awareness and humility, we can eventually figure out what we have a natural talent for and lean into it. But we need to be careful not to mistake natural talent for passion. And at the highest levels of competition, everyone has natural talent. So the only way to stand out apart from everyone is through work ethic. But unlike natural talent, work ethic can be highly variable. And putting this simply, if you love something, you're likely willing to work harder at it than someone who doesn't. Sort of how hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. But I would probably add that passion fuels hard work and talent regardless. But doing what you love is a privilege. Everyone wants to make a living doing what they love. Unfortunately, society isn't exactly structured to reward passion. So if we're looking to build a 1% life and live it on our own terms, we may need to get clever and figure out how to achieve the best adjacent reality with the cards we were dealt. In a nutshell, what I'm saying is that we need to figure out our ikigai, or our reason for being. This is a Japanese concept that is the intersection of what you love, what you're good at, what you can be paid for, and what the world needs. By connecting with our reason for being, we can begin the journey towards self-actualization. As I began reading more about doing what you love, I realized there was so much I didn't know. So at every opportunity I got, I made sure to put myself in a learning mindset. I just needed to explore all the different possibilities of what it means to do what I love. I realized the best way to do this was to listen to other people's stories who have already accomplished what I was looking to do. And so I ended up listening to interview podcasts all day whenever I had the mental capacity for it. Joe Rogan, Gary Vee, James Altucher, Tim Ferriss, that whole crew. I would get at least a few hours of podcasts in my head every day. Looking back on it, I was manifesting what I wanted to become by curating what I listened to all day. It was that intentional action of consuming specific content that led me to start questioning my own possibilities. I would always listen to these stories and think, if he can do it, why can't I? There's nothing inherently special about anyone. The common thread across all these stories that stood out to me was hard work, which gave me the confidence to take a leap of faith and eventually quit my job. And interestingly, it was at this point that I realized the information we consume regularly, whether it's from books, social media, podcasts, movies, or wherever, ends up becoming part of us. And I realized that we end up having this profound choice we can make that determines where our life goes. We can subconsciously consume content and let it take us wherever it wants, or we can be intentional about becoming a certain person by consuming specific things. And it's that conscious decision making that allowed me to begin moving in the direction of my authentic self. And the strange thing about connecting to your consciousness is that you end up confronting that ignorance is bliss. In fact, I think a better way to say it is that knowledge is a burden. Knowing the content I consume daily can either be good or bad for me, and always being tapped into that conscious thought makes me behave differently. But this active choice to become someone can come off as self-centered to those who just live passive lives. From the outside looking in, friends may think I'm less fun because I'm just doing my thing. But I need to be selfish with my time if I want to be happy and live a fulfilled life. Because maybe if I went to that party on Saturday instead of working on my personal project, I would feel lazy, start judging myself, and become disappointed. And I think this example is useful because we often find ourselves being pulled in multiple directions, which causes stress. You know you want to do something for yourself, but you end up doing something else because you don't want to offend someone or let them down. However, as a more conscious individual, I have to accept a couple of truths. One is that I cannot compromise myself for others' perception of me because life is a single-player game. And two, which supersedes my first point, is that there is a time and place for everything. There are times when you should be a recluse and work on something you're passionate about, but there are also times when you should be social and hang out with the people you love. But I would stress this balance is different for everyone, and we each need to figure out where we stand. As an introvert, I know I need less social interaction than the average person. In fact, I enjoy being alone. But I also recognize that if I am not happy and building deep, meaningful relationships with other humans, then I'm sort of missing the entire point of life. So when we're navigating life, we have to recognize we are constantly in a balancing act. We want to have fun and relax, but we also need to work hard. We want to satisfy others' expectations of ourselves, but we also want to make sure we're internally happy. We want to enjoy food, but we also need to eat healthy. And so life becomes this overwhelming waterfall of decisions we need to constantly make. Often the path of least resistance seems the most tempting, but upon further investigation, we sometimes compromise ourselves long term. And so mindfulness becomes a critical weapon for identifying where we put our energy. Some of us are more short-term driven, while others may be more long-term focused. But being too much in one direction can almost become self-sabotage over time. We need to be able to balance multiple perspectives in order to get a clear sense of the positive and negative consequences of our actions. To build on this idea, we are both the object and the observer in our life story. When we experience life, we are being and thinking at the same time, sometimes one more than the other, but our consciousness can regulate that balance through self-awareness. Therefore, we are simultaneously the object and observer, yet are able to choose when to be more of one or the other based on time and place. For example, when I'm on a dinner date with my fiance, I want to be more present and focused on being. But if I'm preoccupied and anxious about something on my mind, I may be lost in thought. And although that is happening subconsciously, that reaction is my body's way of signaling something is wrong. It's almost primal in a sense. But we want to be proactive about our thoughts and feelings, which requires us to constantly be checking in with ourselves using self-awareness. And if we're able to catch ourselves before we react, we can be more present and make better decisions. Distinguishing our primal brain from our higher order brain is what really makes us behave differently from our primal cousins. When something negative happens and we instantly react, our brain is being in the most primal sense. It's just experiencing and processing in real time. But when something negative happens to someone who is more conscious and has more control of their thoughts and feelings, they can catch themselves from reacting by observing from a higher perspective. Our ability to do this ultimately determines if we live a proactive or reactive life. If you're listening to this and are already beginning to judge yourself on your own personal history and actions, then you've already taken the first steps. Upon a deep audit of our past and present behavior, we can begin to practice self-awareness and therefore take steps towards higher order thinking. Checking in and questioning ourselves is one of the most practical ways to see from a higher perspective. And it was at this point that I began asking myself really uncomfortable, ego-killing questions about myself, who I was, and who I want to become. And just to drive this point home, it's important to always remember that we are still animals. We're just advanced primates. And our primal brain, our animal side, is always lurking in the background of our subconscious, looking to find a way to get us to either eat, sleep, or have sex. Because really that's all our purpose is as living organisms. That's all our DNA wants us to do. Live long enough to survive, have offspring, and die. The problem, or I guess the beauty in our scenario, is that we also have a higher order brain, our conscious self, that wants other amazing things like happiness, purpose, and love. And so to just ground ourselves in a good frame of mind, I think it's wise to always have the understanding that our brain is always at odds with itself, the primal side against the conscious self. And as we navigate modern society, some of us are more primal and others are more conscious, and it shows. It's very obvious once you're aware of the distinction. And if we really want to achieve these large existential goals like self-actualization, then we must be tapped into our higher order self and manage our primal selves as best we can. One of the real truths that we all must accept at some point to ground us in reality is that none of us are equal. But really what I mean is that we're all unique. There's no one else in the world who shares your perspective, your genetics, your upbringing, and your experiences. In fact, I would even say the idea of being equal with someone else is miscategorized because by definition, it's not possible. I think a better way to say that is that we should all be treated with equal respect. The survivalist component of our primal brain would tell us not to separate from the pack. It's safer to fit in. Listen to the same songs as everyone else, have the same leisure activities as everyone else, and enjoy the same foods as everyone else. And this is because we are all biologically programmed to follow the status quo of our human tribe. In fact, even our educational system is more about teaching compliance, order, and subjugation than it is about creating free-thinking, open-minded children. This is by design, of course, because we've created a worker society where we must cooperate and rely upon each other to survive. I don't work at the grocery store, but I still need food. Thankfully, someone else works there, so I don't have to. So all of us who still need food are taken care of and can work on things that are important to us. So there is this deep interdependence baked into our society. This, of course, allows us to specialize and lean into our true authentic self, because in modern culture, I don't have to provide all the physical necessities for my family. I can just outsource surviving and focus on things that are truly meaningful to me. But this unfortunately isn't the case for everyone, and we need to be cognizant of that when interacting with others. Understanding someone's situation isn't only an intellectual process, it's also an emotional and spiritual one. I think a good way to think about this is by looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you're not familiar with this, it's really this metaphorical pyramid that we're all trying to climb. There are different versions of it that expand on some of these ideas, but for the purpose of this talk, I will speak about the pyramid with 5 layers. The first 2 layers of Maslow's hierarchy of needs are our basic needs, things we need to survive, such as food, water, rest, reproduction, security, and safety. Every human, no matter your circumstance, should solve these problems first before worrying about anything else. Now, of course, this isn't exactly the order of real life, but your basic needs are the responsibility of your primal brain. As an organism, you're trying to survive long enough to reproduce and continue your offspring. When your life is focused on just the basics, the primal brain takes the wheel and has full control because it has no other choice. You cannot cultivate your conscious self if you're worried about surviving. Just think about that for a second. We throw these words around like sheep when talking about people in groups, implying that some people are living subconscious lives. But we never stop to think about if it's a survival tactic, like fitting in with the group, or if they really are just ignorant. It's inaccurate to cast out generalized judgments of people because we simply don't know them. But it's obvious when you don't have your basic needs met, nothing else matters. And so as more conscious individuals, we need to understand that we come from this place of great privilege because we even have the opportunity to have these types of conversations. As we move up the pyramid, the next 2 layers cover our psychological needs. These are things we need to feel good about ourselves, such as intimate relationships, friends, and even a sense of accomplishment. I'm going to assume that if you've been following along this much and what I'm saying is sticking, that you probably have your basic needs met. It's our psychological needs, however, that lead us to questioning our own identity and where most of us get tripped up, aka first world problems. What am I doing? Where do I belong? What am I good at? Whether we want to admit it or not, we are all in this search for belonging, love, and self-worth. Unfortunately, we rely heavily on external titles, accomplishments, and milestones to justify this. Did you get promoted? Did you get accepted at school? When are you getting married? But by asking those questions, we often think if we don't have those things, that we aren't worthy, or maybe something's wrong with us. Searching for validation in the external world is the quickest way to move away from our authenticity. And I know this firsthand because had I just listened to my peers and family about staying in my banking job, I would have been viewed as a success, but quietly suffered alone. These external trophies are meaningful in our life only if it's what we want. Otherwise, we end up living our lives for other people. And so really, I think escaping this psychological trap comes down to being your authentic self. As we begin questioning ourselves, our purpose, our relationships, and our strengths, we can begin to triangulate what we care about, what we're good at, and what others value in us. We can silence all of the advice we receive and begin following our own internal compass. There are things about you that are core to your character. There are specific things about you that people associate with you. Maybe you're known for being a great dancer or dressing well or knowing every player's stats in the NBA. Somewhere in you exists unique passion that only you have. And once you identify it and pursue it, you have reached the fifth layer and final peak of the pyramid, which is self-actualization. And really all that means is following your own internal compass and fulfilling your own talents and potential. And I'm not going to sit here and act like I have it all figured out, because I don't. I passed the caterpillar stage, but have been in my cocoon for quite a while, as I continue to learn, iterate, and experiment. But I do know I'm well on my own spiritual journey to become a metaphorical butterfly and self-actualize. And I do think I figured out some things that need to be shared with others. I found that living a more authentic life has unlocked a deep happiness inside me that I never had before. And I'm not going to say I found my purpose, because purpose is such a moving target based on where you're at in your life. When I was 5 years old, I was living to play sports. When I was 18, I was just trying to talk to girls. And now at 28, I'm just trying to figure out who I am, what I want to do, and how I can help others. And I don't think I'm unique in being on the spiritual journey. I think we are all, to varying degrees, trying to figure out what this is all about. Some people may see a clearer picture than others, but it can all be refined with honest introspection. And I feel the more I question myself, the sharper my vision is on who I want to become, which in turn causes it to actually happen. But many of us never ask ourselves questions because it's difficult and requires deep thought and accountability. It's much easier to just leave things up to chance, as if your life is one big assortment of probabilistic events. But there is a determinism in life that we can unlock. If we focus enough and ask the right questions, we can design our life. I have this natural inclination to look for the silver lining in traumatic events. When I was 7, my father unexpectedly passed away from leukemia. This was without a doubt the most traumatic event in my life. Not only was he the patriarch and breadwinner of the family, but it also came so abruptly. And soon after, I remember laying in bed as a child, realizing that one day I will have to watch all the people older than me die. In theory, one day I'll have to experience the death of my mother, grandmother, brother, cousins, and whoever else. And being slapped with this reality at age 7 stripped me of my innocence and made me realize, hey, this is real life and you have to deal with it. And looking back on it, I think as adults, our relationship with life and death, or lack thereof, can greatly affect the reality we experience every day. As soon as we are born, we begin the process of death. And even though we intellectually know death is inevitable, it's a concept we rarely have to face head on, except for when it hits close to home. But what's even more nerve-wracking about the inevitability of death is that we have no idea when it will happen in our lives. And I'm not saying we need to live life every day as if it's our last one on earth, because I think that is a bit too extreme and irrational. If you live every day like it's your last, you may end up living a long life, never accomplishing anything of value because you lived completely in the present. But if you spent all of your time planning for the future and one day you die unexpectedly, it's not like you missed out on anything. You're dead. You have bigger concerns to worry about than beating yourself up for not YOLOing when you were alive. But I think we all need to constantly remind ourselves that our life is not permanent. Change is inevitable. And in a strange way, we are constantly in a state of dying. And we can either do something while we're alive to bring meaning to our lives and others, or we can just let it happen when our time is up. This is an active choice. And I bring this up because trauma is a powerful teacher that is grossly overused. Trauma is a very real part of life that forces us to embrace reality and recognize the consequences of our decisions. And while trauma to some degree is inevitable, similar to death, our relationship with trauma can be very telling about our behavior. We don't choose when trauma enters our lives or to what degree, but we do have a responsibility to confront it when we're ready. And I say responsibility because avoiding trauma is doing yourself a disservice. And when we choose to not acknowledge trauma and turn away from it, we really are turning away from reality and constructing a world in our mind that doesn't actually exist. Remember, we each as humans are experiencing a unique reality. My reality of the world is much different than yours or Jasmine's or my mother's. We are all experiencing life differently based on our unique perception of the world and our biases that come with that. But when we choose to treat belief as fact in our reality, or refuse to confront uncomfortable truths from our past, we begin projecting our false sense of reality onto others. But trauma is not the only way we can learn. In fact, I think the safest way to problem solve life is to learn from the failures of others. You see, humans are a species with amnesia. While there are almost 8 billion people in the world today, there have been over 100 billion humans that have ever lived. And many of the problems we face today have not only been encountered by our ancestors, but also by our older peers who we can still have conversations with today. We just find it difficult to learn from others. We say, oh, that would never happen to me. But like a frog slowly being boiled by water in a pot, many of us experience life this way. It's not until boiling water is thrown on our face that we realize, I need to fix something here. And when I think about this, I can't help but recall my time working at the bank. Everyone had all the money they needed to live comfortably, but when I would speak to my coworkers in private, I realized they were all suffering. Many of them were stressed out and seemingly dissatisfied with life. Maybe they had relationship issues or weren't doing what they were passionate about, or maybe they were just stressed out by the job. But the majority would power through and never acknowledge there was a problem. They simply accepted that this is life and this is how it is. They decided they need to work this demanding job to provide for their families and make sure they're okay. A very selfless perspective. But here I was, listening in my early 20s, and quickly realized that I was seeing my future. A reality that I needed to accept, let go of, and eventually escape. I'm a critical person by nature, but being a critical observer simply to judge others is unproductive. If you're critically observing your actions and behaviors, as well as those around you, you can gain some really profound insights. Earlier we spoke about questioning ourselves, which I think is one component of self-awareness. But questioning and trying to understand others can also give us valuable insights. When my mother raised me, the only expectation was to go to college. That was it. If my brother and I went to college, she would have been satisfied with herself as a parent. You see, my mother was raised in the Tompkins projects in Brooklyn by her mother and lived with her older sister. Education was seen as the metaphorical get-out-of-jail-free card. It was the pinnacle of success. And so I grew up in a household that deeply valued education, which ultimately laid my foundation and gave me a direction on what to focus on to be successful and make her proud. When I entered Columbia as a young man, the expectation radically shifted. Looking back on my experience at Columbia, there was this perpetual culture of credentialism. I felt like the barometer of success soon became how many degrees, awards, and internships I had, rather than the value of work I produced. This permeated everywhere. Where did you intern this past summer? You got a full-time offer where? You're getting a master's degree next? I felt like there was this constant competition over who had the best LinkedIn profile. I almost think of it as intellectual flex culture. Instead of posting cars, jewelries, and girls on Instagram, the Ivy League flex was to join a nonprofit, be a student leader, and get that full-time offer at Goldman. I eventually began to feel that attending Columbia, there was this implicit expectation that I either needed to go and get a higher degree next or get a high-powered corporate job. Otherwise, I wasn't fulfilling my expected potential. I felt while attending Columbia, I was on this train headed for a destination that everyone wanted to go to besides myself. For my entire time at university, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I knew I was capable, but the corporate path didn't feel genuine to me. Even now, as I get older, I start seeing the same recurring themes of my peers going back to school for graduate degrees or moving around the country for these really prestigious jobs. And I say job instead of career because I think a career is a state of being you internalize. When you think about who you are as a person, how many of you can say your job is your vocation? Yet we are never taught to pursue a vocation or something we're passionate about. It's more about being safe and surviving rather than taking a risk and thriving in a fulfilling career. This is unfortunately a learned behavior. But I bring this up because I think we need to profoundly begin questioning the beliefs and knowledge that has been passed down to us. And I use the example of education and career fulfillment because I think it's something a lot of us can relate to. And it's very easy to get caught up in this trap where we begin listening to the opinions of others to rationalize our decisions. However, opinions are just feedback. It's something to take note of, but not necessarily to internalize. If people are complimenting you because of your career, it's likely more reflective of how they view you and your progress rather than how you view yourself, which, as we discussed earlier, is essentially irrelevant to your own path. Just because everyone congratulates you for getting a promotion at that job doesn't mean you should be working at that job. But we're pressured into believing we're doing the right thing because the feedback is so positive. And this is just a trap. But even for things like religion and politics, we are often the product of passed down information. Instead of just accepting what we are taught by our elders, we should instead approach everything as a rational observer with a clean slate. And from there, we should build up our views from scratch, because it's also important to recognize your parents, mentors, and everyone else you encounter is biased just like you. That way we know for sure the philosophy we live every day is the product of our own conscious observations and conclusions, and not just something that we've accepted as fact. And when we build up our own set of individual views, it's important not to only rely on yourself, but also others. Ask people questions with the purpose of understanding their perspective, not only from an intellectual level, but from an emotional level as well. So for example, for something as contentious as politics, we are all inherently biased. I'm biased, you're biased. We each experience a unique reality, and we're taught and have learned different things over the course of our lives, whether it was subconscious or conscious. So when engaging with others who disagree with you, it helps to try and understand where they're coming from and why they likely have a different point of view from you. This goes back to an earlier point about being reactive versus proactive. If you instantly react when you hear someone speak who disagrees with you, you're likely unable to communicate with them effectively and therefore unable to expand your own perspective and learn a different point of view. This is being closed-minded. This is why it's so important we communicate with each other using specific language and a tone that resonates well with others. If we're on this path to self-actualization, we must recognize we cannot do it by ourselves. We each are inherently biased based on so many factors in and out of our control. In fact, I think one of the most common cognitive biases we encounter every day is the Dunning-Kruger effect, where the more you know, the less confident you are to be, and the less you know, the more simple, complex ideas may appear to you. Even working through this content for the podcast, I keep qualifying myself and am hyper-conscious not to say any of this as fact, because I really don't know what's going on here. These are all theories based on ever-evolving information I've accumulated over time. I just know how impactful this framework has been for me, so I feel compelled to share it with someone who wants to listen. But I think the most pervasive cognitive bias we encounter is confirmation bias. We all favor ideas that confirm our existing beliefs and what we think we know. It's very easy to do this in every part of your life. When you already have an established narrative about something in your head, it's easy to find facts and data to support your claim rather than taking an objective look with a clean slate and then building your thoughts from scratch. And finally, I think the cognitive bias that we all fall for, unfortunately, is herd mentality or groupthink. However you want to call it, you know exactly what it is. Cooperation is one of the hallmarks of being a human. However, tribalism can be the quickest way to unintended consequences. Like we discussed before, it's a survival mechanism to stay with the pack, share the same ideas, talk the same way, wear the same clothes. It's ironic. In a country where we value individualism so much, we still fall susceptible to groupthink. Standing out from the crowd is the quickest way to get attacked. However, it's the only way you can self-actualize and grow into your potential. Yes, you need to be able to cooperate with the tribe and deal with the common person, but compromising your sense of self for fear of being ridiculed is tyranny at its core. We are all unique people with a distinct perspective. By definition, no two people in the world should agree on everything. Yet due to tribalism and groupthink, we tend to think the opposite is true, that everyone should agree with the group or else they're wrong. And that's exactly why tribalism leads to bigotry, because there is no tolerance for non-consensus ideas. Yet paradoxically, non-consensus ideas are the only way we've evolved for thousands of years. So given we are all suffering from inherent cognitive biases, we must understand that we cannot truly trust our perception of the world and our place in it. Instead, we must rely on others around us to help us gain clarity of vision. But without the perspective of other people around us who we trust, it's impossible to answer deep existential questions about ourselves, about who we are, who we want to become, and what we can offer the world. And while I don't want to oversimplify the idea that we're the average of the 5 people we spend the most time around, I think it's a great place to start begin auditing ourselves. If you're in a monogamous relationship, this person will likely be the number one influencer on your life. Just thinking through this, if you spend more time with someone and exchange more conversations and ideas with them than other people, then they will likely have an outsized influence on your perspective. And we have full control of who we develop relationships with. The beauty in interpersonal relationships is that you choose your inner circle of friends. You choose your romantic partner. You have this choice. And I would even call it a responsibility, because the people you decide to surround yourself with will eventually either help you self-actualize or hold you back. And I think without knowing it, we sort of auto-regulate the relationships in our lives without even realizing it. And the accepted phrase is that we just grew apart. But really what's happening is that the relationship is no longer essential to helping you grow into the person you want or need to become. And this isn't to say you're no longer friends with that person or don't like them anymore, but they have already served their purpose on your path to self-actualization. And in some cultures, this can come off as disloyal. Like, oh, you think you're too good to hang out now. And this can be very sticky to navigate. But it happens because when people lack self-confidence, they sometimes begin to think their value is determined by the people around them, which is just another form of external validation. And the fact you no longer want to spend time with a particular friend or family member could come off as if they're no longer important, loved, or valuable. But that is not your fault. You're just following your own internal compass. They're the ones internalizing that idea within their head, likely because their self-worth is based on their relationships with other people rather than their relationship with themselves. And so as we reflect on our inner circle, it could be useful to not only list them out individually, but to also write down what you respect or admire in them. And just as a starting point, if you don't respect or admire someone in your inner circle, it might be time to reconsider why they're there in the first place. Your inner circle should be for people you have a two-way give-take relationship with. And just as an example, my fiancée Jasmine and I have radically different personalities, however we both share many similar values and ambitions. I'm more of a strategist and use my vision to guide me through life, whereas Jasmine is an empath who is always present and feels out her process. Both are necessary for self-actualizing, but we both need what the other has. And in fact, I would say a big reason we're spiritually attracted to one another is because we both recognize that we have so much to learn from one another. It's a two-way relationship. I'm great at some things Jasmine needs help with, and likewise, I'm terrible at some things that Jasmine does so naturally. What's interesting though is that we can actually measure our differences using personality tests such as Myers-Briggs. And while it might come off as reductionist, I think Myers-Briggs can be a solid starting point at explaining a lot of things about our relationships with others that we intuitively know is true, but can never put words to. And so as a practical exercise, I would first test yourself, and then test the closest handful of people around you. Notice which personalities are complementary to you, which are similar to you, and which antagonize you. Because this whole journey towards self-actualization is a team effort. The Chicago Bulls didn't need 2 Michael Jordans. They needed Scottie Pippen, they needed Dennis Rodman, they needed Phil Jackson, and other support players and staff. If you are the Michael Jordan in your story, then you don't need another MJ. You need people around you to support you and let you be great. But it's having the humility to recognize your own unique character in your life that will help you build the best team around you. Because if you think you're the Jordan in your life, but you're actually a Scottie Pippen, you're in the wrong lane. I know I don't need another strategist in my life. I'm an INTJ personality, which is known as the architect. I've been testing myself at least once a year across multiple platforms for the past 5 years, and it's never changed. When I read about INTJs, it intuitively feels right. But I don't need another architect around me to be great. But I could benefit from an ENFJ like Jasmine in my life to balance out my logic-driven process and introduce love, empathy, and compassion into my perspective. This is just the process of self-awareness, and understanding our similarities and differences from both the intellectual and emotional level can be life-changing. The beauty about life is that even though our starting point is fixed by our unique circumstance, we write our own story from that point on. There are things that are in and out of our control. Every life, by the simple nature of existing, constantly experiences suffering. This is structural to being alive. You broke up with your partner, suffering. Your Amazon package didn't arrive on time, suffering. Your favorite sports team lost in the playoffs. Suffering. All these different events cause varying levels of anguish in us, and it's up to us to figure out how to navigate these events to the best of our ability. Otherwise, we'll never have any energy left to achieve any of our dreams. And we all know what chronic anguish looks like in a person. It manifests itself in lacking self-confidence, apathy, and negativity. Unfortunately, chronic suffering can beat some people up so much physically, emotionally, and spiritually that it can almost feel like an impossible task to dig themselves out of this sunken place. And this is precisely why we need to be ruthlessly protective of our well-being. This means removing the cancers from our life whenever possible. It could be your job, it could be a romantic partner, it could be childhood friends, it could be bad habits, it could be anything. But as conscious individuals, we should be able to identify which relationships and activities are net positives and negatives on our lives. So as we navigate life and the decisions we're confronted with, it's up to us to, by any means necessary, avoid ruin. Don't go broke, don't go to jail, don't get too sick. Otherwise, you may find yourself lost without a way back. And just to clarify this, imagine you were walking down a road and there was a pothole on the street. What do? You can walk through it, you can jump over it, you can go around it. Now, what if tomorrow there was a 4-car pileup in the street? How do you handle it? What if there was a crater in the street? The answer doesn't matter. The point is you have a responsibility to figure it out. And I want to stress, I say responsibility because no one else is going to figure it out for you. Where you are in your life today is the culmination of thousands, if not millions, of decisions you are forced to make on your own. And before we can even begin to think about self-actualizing, we need to have a set framework for navigating life effectively while minimizing anguish so we can maximize our potential. When I first opened up my health facility, I felt like I already had a very strong finance and business background, and I had extremely capable business partners who would be coaches. However, since I deliberately chose to open up a business, I wanted to put myself in the best position possible to succeed. So normally I learn from podcasts, books, YouTube, and other business owners, but I wanted an insider who understood my exact situation to work with me. So I hired a business coach to help learn the ropes of the industry and to give me an alternate perspective of owning and operating a health facility. And the reason I put so much energy into getting good at owning and operating a business is because you manifest what you are. As I look back on how I spent my time during the day, I asked myself if those actions, activities, and events were getting me closer or further away from my goal of becoming a better business owner. And before my coach even asked about my business, we worked on a few mindset exercises. I wrote a clarity statement about my business, I wrote what a perfect day would look like, and most importantly, I wrote my own eulogy, describing the life I wanted to live out and how I wanted to be remembered. I wrote about my character, my accomplishments, and my legacy. And while that eulogy changes over time, it's incredibly awakening to help you find your North Star. When you have something to move towards, navigating and making decisions about what you give your energy to start to become easier, until one day you're instinctually moving towards your North Star every day. Eventually, your North Star becomes the lens in which you see the rest of your life, and you begin connecting dots that weren't even there before, but only appeared because you have this newfound clarity of vision. This is what it means to be awakened. You've consciously chosen to pursue a specific path, and it's up to you to execute and move in that direction. And it's important to emphasize where you end up in your path and how far you go is entirely up to you. You see, life is more deterministic than we like to admit. We have more control over our lives than we are taught. Sure, there are some things that are beyond our control, and truthfully, those are the things that we shouldn't worry about at all. But the reality is that we have the ability to influence our future. Wisdom is simply understanding the long-term consequences of your actions. And the more we reflect and are able to make more thoughtful, conscious decisions, the closer we end up to where we want to be. It's not like this is a waste of your time either. Sitting down and taking stock of your actions and results is probably the single best use of your time, especially early in life. Because that investment in time reflecting makes life way more frictionless and easier to navigate. The more we can self-reflect and take our time making decisions about our life, the more likely we are to end up where we always wanted to go anyways, because we are in control of the direction of our life. So when we think practically of what the path to self-actualization requires, the simplest way for me to approach this problem is to pursue health, wealth, and happiness. If I can do that, I'll become the higher order version of myself because my basic and psychological needs should be met. If we think back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, wealth theoretically should be able to cover our foundational or basic needs, like food, water, shelter, clothing, resources, health, property, and personal security. The way we set up modern society is that money is a requirement to survive. Whether or not we agree with this concept is irrelevant. We're more focused on what actually is rather than what should be. But as we ascend towards self-actualization, many of us get stuck on our psychological needs. And while this may seem like fluff to materialistic individuals, things like friendship, intimacy, family, self-esteem, status, and belonging are core to our happiness. We're not talking about being content with life. We're talking about being passionate about life, being optimistic, and looking forward to the future. Without happiness, our individual psychology can never get to the point where we desire to be the most we can be. And on a personal note, my birthday recently passed, and my 84-year-old grandmother, with zero formal education and limited English, wished me salud, dinero y amor, which translates to health, money, and love. This sage advice is so fundamental to human existence that if you live long enough, you know it to be true. And the earlier in life we can internalize this foundation, the more likely we are to reach our potential. Because if we are held back by material needs like something as simple as food and shelter, or even our psychological needs with something as simple as friendship and belonging, we will not fulfill our potential as humans. Our needs are bottlenecks to our potential, and the faster we can satisfy our needs, the quicker we can also move on to higher order aspirations and transcend our own limitations. We talk about fulfilling our potential like it's our right, but that couldn't be further from the truth. No one has the right to self-actualize. Many people cannot even begin the process of fulfilling their potential because their health may get in the way. In the developed world, we take having an able body and sound mind for granted. Health is a privilege. You are not born with the right to health. And if you are lucky enough to be born healthy and have your faculties, you should be grateful just for that. But health is one of those things that is never on our radar until we don't have it. And so as healthy individuals, we should be deterministic about our longevity if we plan on accomplishing all of these things we want from life. Health should be approached as a daily responsibility, similar to brushing your teeth, taking a shower, or eating. It's a habit that we cultivate over time to ensure we live a prosperous, sustainable, and long life. And so when we think about our relationship with health, many of us don't ever internalize the importance of it until we receive a scare or see a loved one go through illness. Again, this is another opportunity where you can either learn from pain or learn from others. As conscious individuals, we all know what happens if you don't eat well, if you don't move often, if you don't sleep enough, and if you never manage your stress. You eventually get sick and your quality of life deteriorates. We all know someone, likely older than us, who is sick beyond repair due to a lifetime of poor decisions. And so having this knowledge, we can be proactive today to prevent any future chronic issues, or we can wait until we get diagnosed with the disease before we start taking our health more seriously. The choice is ultimately yours, and managing your health is a great way to balance vision and presence in your life. We need to eat healthy, move often, sleep enough, and manage our stress if we want to live long enough to achieve our dreams. But we also need to remain present and understand that while food is medicine, it should also be enjoyed. That's part of human fulfillment and being happy. Taking your health to a neurotic extreme, while obviously good for your longevity, will probably weigh too much on your happiness, which creates a whole new set of problems. Like everything, managing your health is a balance. Being healthy is not a punishment. Being healthy enables you to live a fulfilling life. But any more than that can be too stressful and quite honestly may not be worth the trade-off. Our lives begin and end with happiness. It's the one non-negotiable that we must manage throughout our lives. If we accept that suffering is a fundamental part of life, then we have a responsibility to find opportunities to inject happiness whenever we can. We need to bring fulfillment, purpose, and joy to our life, or else life can seem mundane and depressing. And just to be clear, there's a distinct difference between existing and living. Existing means you're just surviving and getting by day to day with no real existential objective. Living, on the other hand, is experiencing life to its fullest in the way you specifically want. And so as the days pass us by, we need to make sure that we are taking advantage of our precious time alive and make it worthwhile. Having a foundation of happiness and love is a prerequisite for success and fulfillment. When we aren't happy, we underperform our potential. It's really as simple as that. And yes, I know there are people who are incredibly wealthy and unhappy, but they are the exception, not the rule. And in fact, they are indeed underperforming their potential because they could just simply be wealthy and happy. The two are not mutually exclusive. And I would even argue that it's more difficult to accumulate wealth while depressed. That's a tremendous feat by itself. In my experience, it's easier to thrive in a career, in relationships with others, and every other way in your life if you're happy. How we feel about our life, whether positive or negative, has profound consequences on the direction our life goes. Our mindset and attitude towards our situation often become a self-fulfilling prophecy because our beliefs begin to leak into our actions, which in turn affects our reality over time. And this is what people commonly call mental health. And while I don't want to downplay the importance of our physical and cognitive health, mental health is probably the most underrated aspect of our well-being. It really is the bottleneck to self-actualization. If we aren't in a positive place mentally, it makes every other part of our lives more difficult. And like everything, our health can be deterministic. Gaining too much weight, cut out the junk food, move more, sleep more, manage your stress better. If you're in a bad place emotionally, cut out the toxic relationships in your life, change your career, move to a new location, pick up a new hobby. And even if you feel like you're cognitively stagnant, stop consuming social media, learn something new, read a book, or listen to podcasts. All these things are in our control, and we can directly affect our future by auditing our current behavior and adjusting accordingly. One of the biggest uncomfortable truths that we need to get over is that we all need some level of wealth to have the freedom to live a fulfilling life. I'm not talking about surviving and putting food on the table. I'm talking about excelling in life and building the life you know you're capable of sustaining. Of course, this amount of wealth varies based on what comfortable or freedom means to each unique individual based on their inherent definition of what that looks like. But regardless, if we ever want true freedom of choice, where we're orchestrating when and how we use our time, then we eventually need to get to a point where we're no longer trading time for money. Now, I understand not everyone wants this. Most people are content with having a great high-paying job where they can afford a house, support a family, and never stress about splurging on vacations or things. But we're talking about something as audacious as living life on your own terms. And as long as we're stuck in this wage slave trap where we are dependent on some random company we could care less about to sustain our lifestyle, then we are never truly free. The point of accumulating wealth is to achieve financial independence, so we can give ourselves the cover to pursue all things in life that we want. But as long as we are a worker and not an owner, our wealth potential is capped. Even for high-paying trades like a doctor or a lawyer, their income stream is still dependent on whichever hospital or law firm they are employed by. If a doctor wanted to stop practicing medicine tomorrow to fulfill their childhood dream of playing the guitar professionally, then they would still need to figure out how to replace their existing job. But money is just a tool. It's nothing more than that. You could either trade your time for more money, or you can use your existing money to make more money for yourself. So when we think about true wealth accumulation, accepting accountability and risk by becoming an owner or investor helps you earn while you sleep. But what I appreciate the most about wealth accumulation is that it's a positive sum game. Money is not the root of all evil. And in fact, that mentality is exactly the reason why people don't have more money. You don't have to knock someone down to create wealth. Me making wealth does not make anyone else poorer as long as I'm acting in good moral conscience. And to illustrate this, would you rather grow up as royalty during the Middle Ages or grow up today in the projects in New York City? I would argue the person starting in the projects has such a limitless opportunity, while growing up as royalty generations ago would likely be miserable and also disgusting. The fact a poor person today has a better quality of life and access to opportunity than a wealthy person 500 years ago is evidence of wealth being a positive sum game and therefore something worth pursuing. By opening my business off my savings, I was able to add value to my clients' lives. Maybe they lost weight, maybe they're now off blood pressure medication, or maybe they just look better naked. And that value that I gave my clients in exchange for money not only increased my wealth, but also improved their quality of life. This is the basis of capitalism. It's value creation. And to just finish this point off, I want to be clear that capitalism can and does get hijacked by immoral actors in the world. Crony capitalism, corporate socialism, and even nepotism and elitism are real-world examples of how this for-profit system can be manipulated. But this is the reality we live in, and if you want to accumulate wealth, it is possible to do in an ethical way. Given these massive existential goals of health, wealth, and happiness, it's up to us to hold ourselves accountable and stay on track. In order to pursue all three simultaneously, we must always be balancing vision and presence. We need the vision to stay on track the 1,000-step journey, but we also need presence to make sure we're enjoying the ride as well. Checking in with yourself often to realign to your North Star is the best way to stay on the path. Maybe you have a journal or a therapist or little reminders at home. The point is, you need to do whatever works for you to make sure your vision is constantly in the background of your mind. Eventually, you'll begin to internalize your vision, thus manifesting what you are. When you get to this point of always being locked into your purpose, then it comes down to execution. And I would even go further to say that once you internalize who you're becoming, everything else seems to appear less important. Perhaps this is only myself, but I find it easy to become tunnel vision with my goals and lose my presence, which unfortunately could come off as insensitive or self-centered. But thankfully I have a partner and a psychoanalyst who help me manage my reality by grounding my perspective. But I do think you must be ruthless with your time. Niceties and pleasantries are great, but you have to be selfish with your time and energy if you want to carry out an audacious goal like self-actualizing. You cannot be constantly giving out your energy to things that are unrelated to your pursuit. And I say this because the world we currently exist in is extremely distracting. There is an unlimited amount of content you can consume and billions of people you can create relationships with. It's very easy to feel we may be missing out if we're hyper-focused on our own selfish objectives. But if we want to achieve what most people cannot, we cannot haphazardly give away our time and energy. And while this idea applies to individual relationships, I'm really talking about where we give our attention. I think we often give our energy away to things that are not only out of our control, but also not in alignment with our true focus. For example, following politics gets you constantly frustrated and triggered, then either you need to reduce the amount you're consuming, or you need to reevaluate your relationship with the news. Living in a constant state of anguish is exactly the opposite of what we're trying to achieve. And you may think, well, I just want to be informed, which is perfectly valid, but not at the expense of your emotional well-being. If you know you can't handle politics and the news without being emotionally compromised, then it might be better to just avoid it. And I use the topic of politics because it's probably relevant for a lot of listeners right now. But this same concept applies to anything. If your relative gets on your nerves every time you speak to them, just avoid them if possible. You have an obligation to protect your energy at all costs. Aligning your actions with your vision isn't only about how you spend your time. It's about who you spend your time with, it's about the lens you choose to view the world in, and it's about making sure your time alive is being used intentionally. Once we become self-aware and identify what path we want to take, we should consciously check in with ourselves as often as possible to make sure we're moving forward on that path. And just to clarify, this isn't to say you shouldn't do things that aren't necessarily on your path. I know it sounds like I'm saying do whatever it takes to succeed, but that absolutist approach couldn't be further from the truth. We each have a unique reality we live in. We all have different strengths and weaknesses. What I'm saying is that we need to hold ourselves accountable with our own consciousness. No one else is out there checking to make sure you're doing what you need to do to self-actualize. And just as an example, I know I'm more introverted than most people, so I don't need as much social interaction to feel satisfied. But that doesn't mean I don't curate my own moments of happiness. Effort is all relative. What might be a lot of work to one person might be an easy day to another. And this is a function of conditioning, mindset, and a million other factors we can't identify. I purposely work as hard as possible, but I also watch the Yankees play because it's therapeutic. It's balance for me. Watching baseball is my time to relax. But it's all about understanding yourself and auditing what you actually need versus what you want. I watch baseball because I love it. It makes me happy, and it's also nostalgic. Some people walk and smell the roses, while others play video games, and that's perfectly fine. As long as you're giving yourself enough to be happy and not distracting yourself from moving towards your larger existential goals, it's okay. Remember, the point of all this is to be happy. I know watching baseball is part of my equation for happiness. But I also know if I spent all day playing MLB The Show and reading MLB.com, I wouldn't be happy in the long run. So it's all about balancing presence and vision. It's also important to recognize that inspiration is fleeting, so when you get a taste of it, go for it immediately. In the early days of opening OPEX, that's all I could think about. Back then, I would rather work on OPEX on a Friday night than do anything else. And that's okay. I took full advantage of that momentum. But life is full of ups and downs, and we're not going to be motivated every second of every day. Existential goals are a marathon, and the more we can embrace the idea of sustainability and balance, the more likely we are to achieve our version of greatness. Ultimately, we all want the same thing. We want to have a comfortable life that is fulfilling, fun, and exciting. We want to be challenged and feel a sense of accomplishment. We want to love and experience the spectrum of emotions available to us. And we want to feel alive. It's really as simple as that. But yet here we are, having been around for nearly 200,000 years, still finding ways to create conflict. The interesting part about Homo sapiens is that we are one of the only species to be able to cooperate across genetic boundaries, meaning two humans, both from separate parts of the world, can cooperate with each other to create something instead of fighting. Now, obviously, this is on an individual level, but this is still impressive nonetheless. You would never see two lions from separate prides cooperate. They are directly at odds in their reality because they're competing for the same limited resources like food, water, and shelter. But for humans, we generally don't have this issue in the developed world. We live in abundance. Money is the gateway to all the resources we need. However, as we said before, wealth is a positive-sum game. You earning more money does not diminish my ability to make money, unless you're acting unethically or cheating, of course. And therefore, we are able to cooperate without competition. In fact, I would even go as far to say that there is no such thing as individual competition, because while we all want happiness, acquiring that looks radically different to every individual. No two people are on the same exact path vying for the same thing, even for something as competitive as athletics, music, or business. Sure, there may be other people who are doing something similar to you, but if you embrace your unique authenticity, you realize there's room for everyone. The phrase competition is for losers actually comes from Peter Thiel in the context of business, but he brings up an interesting concept I think we can adopt to all parts of our life. No matter how similar your goals may seem to someone else, as individuals, we need to focus on being ourselves as much as possible. You may have the same goal as someone else, for example, getting into the same university, but the path you take there is entirely your own. As long as you stay in your lane and remain authentic to your true self, good things will happen. Most people are more perceptive than we give them credit. We can tell when someone is pretending to be a certain way or trying to be something they're not. And as long as you're trying to treat everything like a competition, you'll be stuck living like someone you're not. At the beginning of this talk, I spoke about self-actualization as this goal we can all aspire to reach. But even getting started on the path can feel like a monumental task. In fact, it almost becomes paradoxical because sometimes we have to go against what we want to get on our path. You see, depending on our starting point in life, we need to figure out how to put ourselves in the best position to achieve health, wealth, and happiness without compromising our sense of self. For myself personally, I knew I needed to start a business about something I cared deeply about if I wanted to improve my quality of life. I was tired of trading time for money, working in an unfulfilling job, and through self-awareness, I knew I valued freedom in my day-to-day more than making over six figures. But in order to have enough money to quit my job, live off my savings, and start a business, I knew I needed to work in a job where I could make as much money as I could in the quickest way possible. So I bit the bullet and decided to stay at the bank for 2.5 years living frugally, so I could be in a position to even attempt starting a business. But this was existentially painful. I had to endure an uncomfortable amount of pain, stress, and frustration to get paid, so I could take a risk on something that was clearly not a guarantee. I needed to sacrifice years of my quality of life in the short term so I could at least get my bearings and take an honest attempt at trying to fulfill my potential. I wanted to at least give myself the opportunity to open and run a business. So really, sometimes self-actualizing requires you to go backwards and can feel unnatural. But as long as you trust your vision and know why you're taking a few steps back, it's worth it. And really, I bring this idea of sacrifice up because health, wealth, and happiness are so interconnected. Some people think, oh, I'll sacrifice my health and burn myself out now with work so I can get rich and then I'll be okay. But we all know that never works. Then you have other people who think, oh, I'll sacrifice my happiness by working in a job I hate so I can get rich, then I'll be okay. The natural inclination is always to sacrifice something else for wealth, as if wealth is the bottleneck of your fulfillment. But wealth accumulation doesn't need to be linear. We're conditioned to believe that if we're making more money than we did last year, we're headed in the right direction, when in fact, that's actually hardly ever the case. How much money you make per year has absolutely zero bearing on how fulfilled or successful you are in life. But I bet if you worked in a job you were passionate about, you would be closer to being fulfilled, especially considering we spend at least a third of our time alive working and another third sleeping. So instead, we should be focusing on figuring out how we can put happiness first and then build up our life around that. If I could distill this into a quick takeaway, it's take some risk. If you aren't content with some part of your life, then clearly something needs to change. Often we look at the lives of people who become successful seemingly out of nowhere as if success is some type of on-off switch, when in fact there were likely years of effort and determination that we don't see on the surface. I think our relationship with the concept of luck needs to be re-examined. I think as a society, we give way too much credit to blind luck, where something completely happens out of your control, but in a positive way. For example, someone getting randomly discovered. We all know this story, but this is the exception, not the rule. Then we have hustle luck, that comes from us doing a bunch of things that eventually leads to an opportunity we can capitalize on. It's almost like you generated enough energy and hustle where luck eventually finds you. While this is a good approach, it still leaves success up to chance. But we don't want chance. We want to be in control of our future. Luck from preparation is essentially spotting luck and taking advantage. If you're skilled in a specific way, you can spot other things that lay people can't. By simply staying in your lane, you can get access to opportunities others don't have. And the final type of luck, which at this point almost becomes fate or deterministic, is luck from your unique character. This is where you have a unique skill set, brand, or character, where luck finds you almost through serendipity. But it's not serendipity. You just happen to be uniquely talented in a specific way where opportunity approaches you. The easiest tangible example of this I can share with you guys is me opening up my business. It wasn't luck that I started a health and fitness business. It was obvious. It makes sense given my unique background of business, finance, competitive sports, and having known other gym owners. I have a very unique, specific knowledge that I can apply to operating a health and fitness business, and I teamed up with my two business partners specifically because they have a unique skill set and philosophy towards coaching. Nothing was an accident. It all came together because we each stayed in our lane, built our unique character, and when the time was right, we combined forces to open up a business. We want to be deterministic and not leave anything up to chance. As I reflect on this series, I realize what I'm essentially trying to do is answer the same questions religions and philosophies attempt to answer, albeit in a more pragmatic way. We're all trying to figure out why we're here, what life means, and how to live what one might consider an ethical and fulfilling life. And so for thousands of years, we've turned towards religion and philosophy to help us get closer to some type of answer. But when I think about religion and philosophies that were established generations ago, I can't help but think that there is an important distinction between being rooted in tradition and being stuck in tradition. And unfortunately, institutionalized religions like Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, and even Buddhism often become more about the teachings of the traditional teachings rather than the teachings themselves. You see, religion is often taught as a belief system, and when we believe something like religion to be true, it comparatively implies that the other religions are not true. There is no world where all these religions can coexist and still be historically or mythically accurate. And having this true or false perception of religion misses the point. Religions aren't in competition with each other. There is no such thing as the one religion to rule them all. They each serve a different purpose for a specific individual. All that matters is what works for you. Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, and whatever else you want to categorize as a religion or philosophy are all just options. Maybe it works for you and maybe it doesn't. Instead of trying to remodel the individual to fit a certain dogma or religion, we should instead be thinking about how we can apply the teachings of said religion to our modern day lives so we can make it relevant. And I think this underscores an important point because in 2020, there is so much diversity of thought, culture, and ethics among each and every human on the planet. And to think there is only one true religion that people should live by is not only dogmatic, but is closed-minded and unwise. Instead, we need to adapt the teachings of religions and philosophies of generations ago to fit the needs of the modern practitioner. Because if we remain stuck in tradition, our cognitive biases will affect our relationship with the external world, and it can be inhibiting to our internal satisfaction. Ultimately, beliefs are just tools that either work or don't work. If the beliefs you follow aren't propelling you towards self-actualization, then it may be worth finding something that does. And I bring this up because I think, especially in modern times, a lot of us have an uncomfortable relationship with religion and spirituality. Often religion is something that was passed down to us, and we either follow it without question, or we pick and choose the parts we like and discard the rest. But half practicing religion to appease your family and community is not only disingenuous but also unproductive. Religion is pointless if deep down we know the teachings don't resonate with us and feel outdated. In my experience, particularly with Roman Catholicism, was that in order to be able to function in good faith as a Roman Catholic, I had to accept certain doctrines as being true. And even as a child, I was unable in good conscience to truly believe the tradition that was being taught. And it wasn't until I entered my young adult years that I really decided Christianity, and more broadly religion, just wasn't a good fit for me. I'm too much of a pragmatist and stoic at heart. And I know not everything in religious texts are supposed to be interpreted literally, but even those stories just didn't resonate with me spiritually. I felt like I was missing something. And I even used to say to my mother, I don't need religion to be a good person. And I really meant that. And in fact, her reasoning for raising me as religious was indeed to give me guidance and structure in my early years. But I live by a different philosophy that I forged by myself, just by observing the world, reflecting, and questioning things around me. And I found that generally traditional teachings like don't harm others were rather obvious to me, whether or not a god or multiple gods existed. I didn't need to be feared into not sinning. I intuitively knew as a child that harming others was not a path that led to an ethical or fulfilling life. And I think the reason we gravitate towards religion is because intuitively we know there is something spiritual about living and being a conscious being. And as we mature, it almost becomes so obvious to us that something spiritual is occurring within us and the people around us. So we gravitate towards religion as the easy explanation for what's going on here. But you aren't a good or bad person for believing in one thing or another. It just is. Religion, philosophy, traditions, and culture are just stories we pass down to help us live a more ethical and fulfilling life. This notion that there is only one way to live is both disrespectful and stagnating to our personal growth. We all move through life with different biases, personalities, and experiences. What works for your parents might not necessarily work for yourself. And if you do share the same beliefs as your parents, then I guess my only question would be, do you believe this because this is what you actually think, or because this is what you were taught as a child? And the reason I say that is because we often think the genesis of every idea, thought, or belief comes from our own brain, when in fact there is so much background cognitive bias occurring that it's often difficult to distinguish your own ideas from others. And this applies to everything, not just religion. It could be your thoughts about politics, racism, relationships, or anything else. And zooming out a bit, religion, philosophy, and even government are just ways that we pass down ethics from generation to generation. The point of these traditions are not to give people a belief system to follow. The point is to give people a particular approach to living an ethical life. And just because you're born into a tradition doesn't necessarily mean it's a good fit for you. As conscious beings with free will, it's up to us to find which approach spiritually resonates with us the best through trial and error. This is similar to how everyone has their own unique love language. Some people prefer acts of service, quality time, or physical touch. The same idea can be applied to religion and philosophy. And it's important to not get fixated on what is true and not true. That binary answer is irrelevant. All that matters is, does it work for you? Does this religion or philosophy help you live a more ethical, fulfilling, and happy life? And if you've been following what I've been saying through this series, really what I'm presenting here is a secular approach to living. Secular, or the absence of religion, implies tolerance, because I don't know what is true or not. I give equal respect to all religious traditions and philosophies. I only care about what works for the individual. And as I reflect on the culture that I've been born into, I can't help but think about how in the United States, we've all chosen, by virtue of living here, to follow the constitution of a Christian democracy founded 250 years ago, which I find strange because almost half our population is not Christian. And when you think of it that way, it's obvious why we have so much political conflict in our nation. We're a diverse group of people following a Christian democracy that implicitly imposes its own religious traditions on those who simply don't want to follow. And if you're a bit lost, just ask yourself why gay marriage is such a contentious debate. And it has nothing to do with equality and everything to do with Christian values. And herein lies the problem with trying to project your beliefs on others. It's intolerant, dogmatic, and never works. And I would even go further to say that most political differences we have with other people aren't about politics at all. It's almost always an ethics and values issue. And this is because on a fundamental level, Democrats, Republicans, and everything in between all have different ethics and values. Some political groups believe in conserving a 250-year-old constitution, which is known as being stuck in tradition, while others are more liberal and want to modernize the existing constitution. This is being rooted in tradition. And just to be clear, this isn't a partisan statement I'm trying to make. It's literally the definition of conservative and liberal. But a truism of humans is that those in power will always do whatever they can to stay in power. And this is exactly why we have so much social, political, and economic conflict today. And while we should all be tolerant of people with other views and ideas, that really is true with the caveat that it's also okay to disagree. And we shouldn't try and convert everyone to our point of view. We can try our best to educate others, but no one wants views and beliefs projected on them, especially in a public setting, because when we do that, what we're really telling them is that their perspective is wrong, which can be combative and also embarrassing. So given ethics can be a contentious topic, we need to be more mindful when communicating with people who share differing views. This is really one big pitch to help you figure out your own personal philosophy. To some extent, we all have a personal philosophy we live by, operating in the background of our subconscious, but it's not until we dissect what's there that we can truly say we live in an intentional way. And I think this type of self-auditing is important to do because we really live two lives simultaneously. We live an external or participatory life where we share the world with other people and things, and we also live an internal or solitary life where we are stuck with our thoughts and feelings all by ourselves in our mind. And because we're social creatures and spend most of our time interacting with other humans, most of us tend to focus on the participatory world, where you have to talk with people, cooperate with others, and connect with family and friends. But when we're not doing that, we are left by ourselves in our mind, where we can reflect on our place in the world, connect with our emotions and feelings, and question reality. No one is saying you need to be a monk and live in isolation with your thoughts, but you also shouldn't spend all of your waking hours engaging in the external world as a way to escape yourself. There needs to be some optimal balance where you can grow on your own and then take it out into the real world. Sort of what I'm doing here with the podcast. This is just a form of self-expression for myself. I spend a lot of time by myself reading, thinking, and reflecting, and when I think I have something value add that I can share with other people, I want to make it a point to put it out there, because we each have a unique perspective that can be shared to benefit someone else. And so when I say find your personal philosophy, odds are you already have a good idea about your perspective on specific things. And these views can be influenced by a mix of everything you've ever encountered in your life. But what's important is that you find the thread that connects it all, so that you can use your philosophy as a framework to help you solve any existential problem that crosses your path. Because as long as we are not self-actualizing, our lives aren't as good as they could be, which means we have a responsibility to fix it if we truly want to be happy. So if I had to distill my personal philosophy into some key ideas, I think the easiest way to explain it is by walking through it in the first person. In order to achieve my potential, I must first acquire self-awareness through deep introspection and connecting with others. I am one individual person experiencing a unique reality every day as I exist in the world. Every day I have to balance my primal drive for sex, shelter, food, and safety with my higher order brain that desires fulfillment and happiness. And so as I go through life, I am simultaneously thinking and being. Depending on my level of consciousness, I can choose to think or be more. When I'm with my family and friends, I'm being more, I'm more present. But when I'm by myself, I'm thinking more. I'm planning the vision for my life. But in order to balance this presence and vision, I need to not only embrace reality and confront things that make me uncomfortable, but I also need to question myself and the world around me. This is because I have inherent cognitive biases built into me. And so I need to rely on others around me to help decipher the truth. And the more perspective I can acquire, the more I can be self-reliant and pursue the goals that matter to me. Because in reality, I am the author of my life story. I can choose to be the active author in my story and think out the story arcs I want my journey to have, or I can be an unconscious spectator and let the world write the book for me. And so clearly self-awareness plays a massive role in writing my own story. The more I follow my internal compass, the more fulfilled I become. However, knowing I live in a modern world, I know I cannot achieve happiness without certain needs being met. I need to not only take care of my health so that I can live long enough to play the game at the highest level, but I also need to accumulate wealth because I must survive and have enough freedom to pursue my authenticity. And so life becomes this balancing act once I achieve self-awareness of navigating how to be healthy, wealthy, and happy all at the same time. And so every day I need to find ways to keep myself honest. I need to constantly be checking in with myself to make sure my actions are in alignment with the vision of my life. But I also need to be conscious of remaining present and enjoying the path. Because happiness is in the details. We can either choose and be open to seeing the happiness around us every day, or we can be blind to it and pretend it doesn't exist. And it's very easy to get lost because life is constant suffering. I recognize there are things I must do to survive if I want to accomplish these huge existential goals. And I also recognize I need to protect myself from anything that drains me of my energy, because my life is the most important life to me. No one cares about me as much as me, so I have a duty to make sure I curate the world around me to put me in the best position to be happy and fulfilled. And so really I'm sharing this with you all because I know this will help at least one person listening. Like I said in the first episode, my one goal from this series is to give someone the spark of self-awareness to begin their spiritual path. And I specifically say spiritual because the ideas I'm sharing with you all aren't purely intellectual or emotional. As a highly rational thinker, I tend to use logic and reason to justify my behavior. But intuitively, success isn't only about the money in your bank account. A lot of the information I shared here has been trapped in my soul for years, but it wasn't until I started speaking with a psychoanalyst that I was able to crystallize some of them. I'm not saying I have all the answers. Clearly, if you've listened to any of this, the point is that none of us have the answers. But I do know that I have developed a unique perspective that has put me on a path to self-actualize and achieve health, wealth, and happiness. So I'm not here to present a belief system. I'm here to present a particular way that I approach life that possibly could be beneficial to someone out there. But the reason I call it spiritual is because I've discovered a lot of what I've been already thinking is based in secular Buddhism. While I was raised Roman Catholic, I never really felt any type of connection to a god or gods. The world in a way is just an assortment of probabilistic events occurring and reacting with one another in ways we just can't comprehend. And so we try to use science as a way to explain what is going on in the world. For example, thousands of years ago, humans may have thought that rain were the tears of the gods because they were sad. But in fact, rain is just droplets that have condensed from atmospheric water vapor and then became heavy enough to fall under gravity. That's our current explanation of what's happening when it rains. Maybe as we learn more about our planet, the galaxy, and the universe, we'll have a different understanding about what's happening when it rains. But this is all about perspective. And I feel people generally use religion and philosophy as a way to explain what's going on here, what's the purpose of life, or what does all of this mean. But like I implied earlier in the series, many of us are sort of brainwashed into dogmatic views. We all suffer from the same cognitive biases as everyone else, and the only way we can be more thoughtful of what's happening is through self-awareness. We should all question everything with a highly critical lens, and if you think questioning is offensive, then you're part of the problem. As capable humans, we all have brains to think for ourselves. We can either subscribe to spoon-fed information for fear of not offending anyone, or we can pick apart life with a microscope until we have a clear vision of the truth. And I know this was a 180 from my first two episodes, where I spoke about tangible things like the economy and investing, but I think knowing facts and having knowledge is only one part of the equation of true success. If you don't know why you're learning these facts, then you need to start questioning yourself. Obviously, we all need money, but many of us don't reflect on why or how much. The point is to survive and be comfortable, but by cultivating an existential intelligence, we can ascribe meaning to these tangible goals like investing and make them more attractive. This podcast is really just a form of self-expression for myself and about the things I'm passionate about. I love learning about business, investing, philosophy, psychology, and more recently spirituality. I can't help but feel all these things are somehow interconnected. And so to the extent my ideas can help some of you, I'll continue to share them. I've learned from countless people that I'm simply paying it forward. So with that, thank you for joining me in the Velez Zone, where we talk about everything health, wealth, and happiness. Stay awake, guys.